All right, let's get straight to Washington Post congressional reporter Sean Sullivan. He's on Capitol Hill. Sean, my head is spinning. I know you cover Congress. My head is spinning as to whatever happened last night, whatever took place last night really was, and what was really discussed and what was not, and what was agreed to and what was not, and what was negotiated and what was not. What do we know about what actually happened?
Well, it certainly has been a whirlwind last 12 hours or so, and we're hearing different accounts of what that meeting meant, what was discussed, whether there was a deal or not. One thing that I think is clear is that this did seem to catch a lot of Republicans on Capitol Hill, including top Republicans, by surprise. And when you listen to Republican leaders today, we heard from Paul Ryan there. I talked to John Cornyn, the second-ranking Republican, a little while ago, and he said, you know, this is not a deal, it's a deal to make a deal. So I think Republicans are trying to frame this as more of an informal discussion that Trump had with the Democrats. But the reality is more and more Trump is bringing Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer to the White House. He's talking to them. They struck a deal on the debt ceiling. This looks real. These negotiations look real. And I think some Republicans are kind of sitting there wondering, hey, why aren't we involved in this stuff?
So, Sean, when the president says, as he did just a couple of hours ago, that House Speaker Paul Ryan and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell are on board, I'm using the president's words there, what are they on board with?
And that is the question. You know, when I posed that to John Cornyn, he said, well, you know, we're all together in the sense that we want to make a deal. We want to come to an arrangement on this. They're sort of downplaying the idea that there is some actual deal or some set of principles that, you know, that the Democrats and Trump have arrived behind. But this is the issue when the president does not have a good line of communication with his own party's leaders on Capitol Hill. And that's really what's happened the last few months here, is that relationship has really, really deteriorated. And so we have questions like this, you know, what are they on board for? What aren't they on board for? Trump is saying one thing, Ryan is saying something slightly different, McConnell is saying something slightly different. And the Democrats are saying, well, look, we're really far along with coming toward an agreement. So you're getting a lot of conflicting signals. I think the takeaway here is that Trump does seem genuinely willing to talk to Democrats about immigration, which is pretty striking because this is an issue he staked his campaign on and alienated a lot of Democrats and even some centrist Republicans when he ran for president.
And I should point out for our viewers, because they may not know this, but that House Speaker Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell were not at last night's meeting, right?
No, they weren't. You know, Ryan and McConnell, I believe, spoke with Trump this morning, earlier today, but we're talking about hours and hours after the fact. Schumer and Pelosi have been out there. They've released multiple statements. They've made comments about this meeting. They're moving ahead. And so, you know, it is striking to see the Senate Majority Leader, who is a Republican, the House Speaker, who is a Republican, seeming to be 10, 12 hours behind everything that's been happening with the president, with Pelosi, with Schumer at the White House. And again, right now this seems real. We'll see where it goes. We'll see whether Trump continues to want to deal more with Democrats. I mean, I think that, you know, in the wake of the failure to pass a plan to repeal Obamacare, like a lot of Republicans want to, there's a lot of frustration among Republicans, and that may have led Trump to say, you know what, I'm going to find some different negotiating partners. I'm going to start working more with Chuck and Nancy, and, you know, we'll bring McConnell and Ryan along afterward if we can.
Well, I want to highlight this tweet from Congressman Steve King, a very conservative Republican from Iowa. He says, in response to an Associated Press tweet that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer had a deal with Donald Trump to protect Dreamers, he wrote, "At real Donald Trump," so at the president, to the president of the United States, "If the AP is correct, Trump base is blown up, destroyed, irreparable, and disillusioned beyond repair. No promise is credible." Is this why we're all of a sudden seeing the president sort of, as best as he can, trying to walk back what may have been discussed last night in a series of tweets this morning?
It may very well be the case that's why he's doing this. You're right that we are hearing from a lot of conservatives, not just Steve King, but a lot who are both surprised and I think deeply troubled by the idea that Trump, you know, even if he hasn't struck a final deal with Democrats, seems to be moving in that direction, seems to be wanting a deal to replace DACA, perhaps in a way that offers a path to some sort of legal status for some of these undocumented immigrants. I think they find this really, really troubling and really at odds with the kind of campaign that Trump ran, immigration was a central core issue for Trump as a candidate, not only in the Republican primary, but in the general election. He took a really, really hard line stance, took a really, really conservative position that even a lot of members of his own party disagreed with and said was far too severe. And so I think they're looking at this today and they're wondering, wow, what is this president doing? And so we'll see in the coming days. I mean, he does have a pretty loyal base, but if he does make a turn in a different direction on this issue, we'll see whether they continue to stick by him. I think right now it's an open question.
And finally, I know that you obviously cover the Congress, but you are quite familiar, I'm sure, with Attorney General Jeff Sessions because he was a former senator. I'm wondering if you're Jeff Sessions this morning, how do you feel about having the president having sent you out 9 or 10 days ago to inform the American people that the DACA program is being rescinded, that Homeland Security is going to be putting in a plan into place to ensure that those people who, in the words of the Attorney General, are breaking the law are removed from this country? Then you've got the president saying nobody needs to worry for 6 months, and now this. How must he feel?
Well, I think he's got to have some questions about what the ultimate stance is going to be of his boss, what the ultimate stance is going to be of his administration, and what it is that he needs to be out there talking about, pushing, advocating for right now, because it seems to be kind of muddled at this point. We don't know exactly where this president is going to come down on this issue. He seems to say something slightly different, as you point out, each time. And you're right, Sessions right now is sort of the face of ending the DACA program. He was the one who the administration sent out to give those remarks, to explain why they were ending it. And you see Trump on Twitter today with a pretty strikingly different message. So, I think he's got to wonder where this administration is going to come down, and what he's going to need to be saying in the coming months.
It is interesting. Also, Sean, I think you will agree, and others have reported on this, that for the first time, Republicans are sort of scratching their head at what the president is saying, tweeting, and doing when it comes to border security, DACA, et cetera, and not on some of the other things that members of the opposition have called him out on. This is finally what it took for the Republican Party to say, wait a minute, this is not what we signed up for.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that when you look at last week's deal that the president struck with Democratic leaders to raise the debt ceiling, to prevent a government shutdown, to provide disaster relief, Republicans were surprised by that, but you didn't hear the uproar. They said, okay, this is a temporary deal, we can renegotiate this. This seems to be a different matter altogether in their view. The fact that he may be about to, and we don't know this because he could once again change his position, but he may be about to fundamentally reshape the way he talks about immigration, the policies he advocates. And so I think a lot of conservative activists are looking at this and saying, okay, it's one thing if he cuts a deal with the Democrats on the debt ceiling. It's a whole nother thing if he's starting to move closer to their direction on immigration. And I think that's why we're sort of seeing this outcry from the right, which really started in the middle of the night last night when this news was breaking, and that shows you how passionate people are about this.
And you know what, Sean, we haven't even talked about tax reform, and we're out of time, so we'll have to do that another day, but that's another big push that the president and members of Congress have, and this is sort of being overshadowed by that. All right, Sean Sullivan of the Washington Post, as always, my friend, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, my pleasure.